Rich Lockwood at long last. Welcome to the Freetrail podcast, buddy. Good to see you.
Hey, man. Good to see you too. I'm stoked to be on here.
Here we go, man. It has been a long time coming. Of course, you are a good friend of our mutual friend, Ryan Thrower, the producer of this podcast, and you have quietly been on a roll, making a name for yourself in the sport. And it was only a matter of time until we got you on the show. And of course, you're just coming off a phenomenal victory at Run Rabbit. So I was like, man, it seems like a good time. And of course, you and I know this is delayed by 1 week because my internet connection last week was unreliable. So here we are finally making it happen, and super happy to have you on the show. So maybe first, just tell us how you're feeling after Run Rabbit. Has it sunk in yet? The, performance you put together there in Steamboat a couple of weeks ago?
Yeah. So I think it's like 2 weeks post now. And I'm just starting to get back to some more normal running this week. But yeah, it's kind of crazy. Still feels a little bit surreal. The performance at Run Rabbit, and there's definitely a little bit involved with it that's still lingering. But yeah, I'm really pumped on how it went down. In a lot of ways, it was like something that I've been working towards, and it just felt so good. And also, yeah, just surreal because I haven't had a race come together like that well before.
Heck yeah, man. Well, we'll go into all the details because I do want to hear the long and the short story of, how you were able to put it together. And from what I've gathered, just from talking to other people who were there and from yours and other people's social media posts, it seems like it wasn't without drama and excitement. So we'll get to that in a little bit, but you are a newer name on the scene. And, for that reason, I think it'll be fun to do a little bit more background and introduce you a little bit more to the audience. You live in Seattle now. Is that where you grew up? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. First of all, before we get into me, I just want to say thanks for having me on here. Like, the host of people that you've had and talented athletes you've had on here is amazing. So I feel like I'm in just like the most amazingly talented company. But yeah, I grew up in Port Townsend, which is a small town on the Olympic Peninsula here in Washington State. And
that's the town where you can take the ferry over to Vancouver Island, right?
So that's Port Angeles, which definitely gets confused with Port Townsend a ton. It's close. It's all out there on the Olympic Peninsula. So yeah, it's on the Quimper Peninsula on the Olympic Peninsula. So it's like tucked away. It's like a sailing hippie town. So super awesome place to grow up. Did a ton of just biking around, and there's like an old fort there. So there's a ton of trails and just like these concrete forts that are built into the bluffs in Port Townsend. And so, yeah, just a lot of hiking around and scrambling around as a kid and a youth over there.
Is it on the Puget Sound side of the peninsula, or is it on the Pacific side?
It's on the Puget Sound. It's like the way that Washington is shaped, how it comes over, and like right before it dips down into the sound, like right on that tip, it's so it's like between the straits or on the north side of it, and then the Puget Sound comes off towards the other side.
Sweet. So I know that you're somebody who spends a lot of time in the mountains, in the forests. Tell us a little bit about your history with sport, because I think you're sort of a later arrival into the running game, but are somebody who does a lot of skiing and mountain biking. So tell us a little bit about your background with sport.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely late to the running game. I grew up mainly just hiking, and then like all through school, through elementary school, middle school, and high school, I just played soccer religiously, like year round. I never really thought about it as, something I was super competitive in. It was just part of life. All of my friends did it, and we just played soccer all the time. So there wasn't really ever any room for me to think about other sports, really. And I love soccer so much. But then, yeah, my parents are big skiers. So most of our family trips would be to ski. We'd spend a lot of time skiing all winter long. It's pretty crazy. Port Townsend's really tucked away, but there was a ski bus that would take us every weekend during the winter out to Stevens Pass, which is even from Seattle, it's like a 2-hour drive. So it would be like wake up at 4 a.m, get on a school bus and take the ferry over. It was like a whole day thing, but I loved it. I would do it with all my friends. So lots of skiing and then, yeah, just soccer all the way up through high school. And even a little bit, I went to community college right after high school and played a little bit there. And then had, I don't know, like a lot of kind of just vagabond years. I dropped out of college and worked seasonal jobs, worked at Stevens Pass, a couple ski resorts, and then was just traveling a lot. Spent a good amount of time, like 3 months in South America and some time in Central America. And in South America, I stumbled upon rock climbing. And so when I came back to the States, at that point in time, I got all in on rock climbing. And at this point, I wasn't playing soccer anymore. And I just was climbing like 3 times a week at the gym, every weekend, for like 3 or 4 years. And then I went back to school. I was bartending and back in school I had originally gone to get a biology degree, but ended up switching gears. I took some anatomy and physiology classes after I was taking chemistry and biology, and realized that anatomy and physiology was really more my style. And so switched into a healthcare path. And then, so it was rock climbing, skiing. And then towards the end of my college, I switched to do an X-ray path. I thought about nursing, and then ultimately decided to become an X-ray tech. So went to school.
That's what you're doing now.
What's that?
That's what you're doing now.
That's what I'm doing now. Yeah.
Talk about the like vagabond years a little bit, because it's certainly something that a lot of people kind of dream about doing, and I identify with it to some degree. I mean, working seasonal jobs and being kind of a ski bum and kind of orienting your entire life around outdoor sport and recreation and travel. In what ways was that formative for you?
Yeah, I think as a kid, I really loved skiing and snowboarding. And so I had always thought about it heavily. And then when I really wasn't having fun or like much interest at all in school, I kind of just fluidly went into it. And I didn't own a car. I had like no possessions pretty much. And yeah, I think in a way it's cool to just, it's a little bit kind of my personality. I'll just get focused on something and the blinders go on and I'm just like all in on whatever that is. And I was like, I'm just going to ski. And I don't know, there's something about just like jumping into something and not really knowing what the plan is or where you're going to be going from there. And then things just organically happen. And like, yeah, just letting that happen and I didn't know at the time it would be a couple of years, you say like, oh, maybe it'll be just a ski season. And then all of a sudden, one thing leads to another. And yeah, I think it was definitely formative and cool to find myself just jumping into situations and being like, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to make this work, but I'm going to try as hard as I can. And then, yeah, just jumping from one thing to the next and making so many friendships and having so many amazing experiences with people from all over that I wouldn't have met otherwise in the mountains was amazing.
So cool. So going back to what you do professionally, I honestly had no idea what it was that you did until I was listening to Trail Society a couple of weeks ago, and Corinne mentioned that her husband was like bumped into you at the hospital where you guys are both working right now. So maybe tell us a little bit more about what you're doing professionally and more generally what it's like working in healthcare, where I know there's long hours. I heard that immediately after Run Rabbit, you had to pull like some 30-hour shift. So tell us a little bit more about your professional life.
Yeah. So yeah, like I said, I went to basically like a 2-year year-round technical school to get a degree in radiologic technology, which is to take x-rays. And so when I originally got out of school, I had done all of my training during school at the Level 1 Trauma Center here in Seattle at Harborview, which is a Level 1 trauma center for Washington, Alaska, Montana, and Idaho, which is pretty crazy. I think it covers, like one of the largest areas for a Level 1 trauma center in the nation. And I worked in the ER there for about a year and a half, taking pictures of broken bones, having a lot of wild experiences there in the ER. And then an avenue that I hadn't really even known about when I went to school, which is another modality that you can work in with a certificate in radiologic technology, is called interventional radiology, or they sometimes call it angiography, but it's basically imaging blood vessels in an operational suite to do minimally invasive, life-saving procedures. So I transitioned into that.
What type of procedures? I'm curious. Is it sort of blood clot procedures?
Yeah, so it's some of that. We cover a really wide range at Harborview, but I work with the neurosurgeons in stroke setting. So if someone's coming in and they have an ischemic stroke, blood clot in their brain, then we do something called mechanical thrombectomy, which is, you just use catheters and wires to go up through a femoral artery all the way up into the brain. And then you place, we call a stent retriever, expand a stent, like a temporary stent, into the clot, let it sit for 5 minutes. And then you use aspiration, like basically vacuum tubing at the same time to remove the clot from the brain. And hopefully, and usually it happens in the first try. But obviously these procedures are super complex. But I also work with cardiovascular surgeons to do like heart attack. If someone's having a blockage in their heart, then we'll place stents into the heart. And then we also do diagnostic procedures, having people come in and we'll just image their coronary arteries or their cerebral vasculature to see if they have an aneurysm or if there is a blockage that they need to be worked up to have a stent placed at a later date. And then, I also get to work with vascular surgery, doing peripheral stentings in like legs and arms, or I also work with what we call body IR, which is a whole mix of things, from placing filters in the inferior vena cava, placing gastrostomy tubes, ports for chemotherapy access, and then doing pulmonary embolism, thrombectomy. It's a whole wide range of things.
You're using a lot of big words.
Yeah.
I'm curious, how has working in that field helped you to appreciate the preciousness of health? Because I imagine that you're confronted with the fact that our health is life's most precious gift. How has that impacted you personally?
That's like absolutely right, Dylan. From the moment I started doing my training there at Harborview, it's working at a Level 1 trauma center. It's like the most intense way of realizing how like frail life is and how meaningful it is to have fitness and being able to get out and about. I'm reminded daily like how amazing it is to be able to just like get out and walk around. But then, of course, like every day in the mountains running or just running around here, I'm constantly reminded like how, because it's not even like just, people getting in a car accident, or like some people saying like they just, were walking across the street and someone didn't see a stoplight and then they've like broken their pelvis and they can't walk. It's a huge reminder, and I never take for granted any day that I have, for sure.
I'm very lucky to have not spent much time in a hospital, but of course we just had our son, and it was the first time I had been into a hospital for a long period of time. And of course, like, it was an amazing, life-affirming, beautiful situation for us, but it had me thinking just like wow, most people in this building are here under very different circumstances. And you are sort of struck with that realization. So kudos to you for what you do. But moving on to sort of talking more about your entry to trail running, I think this is interesting because obviously you have a diverse athletic background. You mentioned that sometimes you find new things and get extremely focused and obsessive about it. So tell us about your entry into the sport and in what ways it captured you.
Yeah. So I think I started road running. Like I had stopped, I was playing indoor soccer, and with school and with working and then trying to rock climb, I was just kind of like, I didn't have time to do it anymore. So then decided I was going to start running just in my neighborhood to stay in shape. And then that quickly spiraled. I think that was like 2012 or 2011. That quickly spiraled into like, oh, I'm going to do a road marathon, and started training for that. And then so I ran road marathons, and I would just do one a year for probably 5 years. And then at the same time, like simultaneously, I was really into rock climbing, and I had always been big into backpacking, hiking, and then of course, yeah, ski touring. So then I can't remember if someone told me about it or if just through signing up for road races, I had stumbled upon trail running. And it was kind of like a light bulb moment that I was like, oh, this is like, I love running and I love the mountains. So this is the perfect like combination of both. So I decided I'd sign up for a trail race right when I was graduating from X-ray school. And so, yeah, perfectly coincided. I had my ceremony for the end of school. And then like the next weekend I went out and raced. It was a rain shadow race here in the Northwest on the gorge, but on the north side it's called Beacon Rock.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
On Hamilton Mountain over there on the Washington side of the gorge. That's a great place to run. Yeah.
It was awesome. And yeah, it was, I still didn't own a car at this time. I bought my first car when I was like 30. But so, yeah.
Why is that, out of curiosity? Was it an ethical thing or was it just laziness, low budget?
Like a combination of both. I had like found a way to live my life that I didn't really need one. I just biked a ton, and then, would just give my friends gas money if they were driving out to the mountains and I was coming with them. So I caught a ride with someone. There was like a carpool portion on the website for the race. I met someone and drove down with her. And then, yeah, everyone camped out for the race. And I met a ton of people there. The race went really well. It was absolutely beautiful on Hamilton Mountain. It was kind of like a foggy, rainy day with not many views, but the trails were amazing. And I did pretty well. And then there was like an after party with beers and like bluegrass band, and it was like just such a polar opposite of what I'd experienced when I was road running. I mean, I was kind of in a different place when I was road running and was a little bit more introverted. So I don't know. I just like met a ton of people and then ran with them all summer in the mountains. And it was like just a total shift. And it immediately—
the culture, bro.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, totally. And it immediately just grabbed my focus so much because it was so dynamic and fun. And I went from running one road marathon a year to wanting to, just run like every weekend in the mountains.
Heck yeah. So looking back at your early results, though, it hasn't exactly been linear, or it wasn't totally successful right away. Like you had a 79th at Chuckanut, you had a 25th at Lake Sonoma, and here you are winning Run Rabbit. Tell us about your attitude in those early days. Were you approaching it competitively, or did that come later?
Yeah, I don't think I was really approaching it that competitively from the outset. I did well. I think I got like third at Beacon Rock. And so I was like, oh, wow, this is way different than running a road marathon where I wasn't even thinking about my placing. But I hadn't come from any kind of running background where I thought I could ever be competitive, as like purely from like an enjoyment side. So yeah, it wasn't until a little bit later on that I was like, oh, I think I want to really dig into this and try to get better. I also didn't know anything about training when I first started out.
So do you remember a specific moment where you thought either, hey, I actually do have talent for this, or conversely, hey, I actually really like this and I'd like to take it more seriously?
I don't know about a specific moment. I think like I think maybe it was my second year racing, or maybe my third year running ultras. I went out and ran a race just here on Vashon Island, rode my bike out, camped at the start line, and got up the next morning. And then, yeah, ripped like a pretty fast 50K and won it overall. And it was a mom and pop race that wasn't super competitive, but I think just having that like first place win, I was like, oh, maybe I should just try a little bit harder. Cause I've always been like, it's hard to balance skiing and running and climbing. I would always be, jumping in between. If there was a good snow day in the winter, I was like, I'm not going to go out and run. I'm going to go ski, which I still kind of do. But I think, after that, I was like, oh, maybe I should try to just spend a season and really dig in and try to make something happen.
Awesome. So also just having perused your results, it occurred to me, and you can tell me if this is accurate or not, that the I'm Tough race in 2020 was potentially an important moment for you, finishing third behind Jason Schlarb and Dakota Jones, who are of course, two of the greats, certainly of my generation. And it seems like it was a great opportunity for you to gain more experience racing against athletes like that. And finishing third behind them was potentially a good way for you to say, hey, I'm not actually that far off these name brand athletes in the sport. Am I touching on something there? And can you tell us a little bit more about that I'm Tough race in 2020?
Yeah. I think that's a pretty astute observation. That definitely made me feel a lot more like, I was on the cusp of something. It was the pandemic year, or like the start of the pandemic year in 2020. So I hadn't really even thought the race was going to happen. And then like maybe a month and a half before, they were like, yeah, we're going to put the race on, it's going. And so I think it ended up being one of the only hundreds that happened that year. And so all of a sudden it went from being this small, like, maybe not small, but like, I think a little bit lesser known of a mountain 100 in McCall, Idaho. And then I looked at the entrance list like a month beforehand, and it like exploded with a bunch of people that I was like, oh, wow, this is going to be a lot more competitive than I thought. And so, when I went out there, I was like, oh, I didn't know what would happen, and felt good. And I got to run with like Avery was there. Schlarb was running it. I think Yassine ran it that year, and Dakota was there, of course. There was like a handful of I think Ryan Kaiser ran it that year. There was a bunch of people. Emily Hoggood ran it that year. So it was really fun to run in like a pack at the start. And then I got a little bit too excited and ran out off the front up this first mountain. And then Jason ended up passing me at like the marathon mark, and I kind of just chased him. And then Dakota caught up with me, and I got to run with Dakota for a good, I don't know, probably 10 miles or 15 miles. And that was a really amazing thing for me to just like chat with him. And he's just like such mellow and like approachable, like really nice guy. He was just going back to school, so we were just chatting a bunch. And then they both ended up kind of in the last, there's a big climb at the end, and I think I just kind of had gone out too hot and powered down a little bit, so they both took off towards the end. But I didn't end up crazy far behind them. So it was a moment where I was like, whoa, that went way better than I thought it would. And these guys are way more competitive than I would ever put myself in a realm of. So
and way more experienced too. I mean,
that too.
For every athlete, you have to kind of get your ass kicked by the generation before you kind of figure it out yourself. I feel like, and maybe that was what happened to you there at I'm Tough. So And now you're coached by Schlarb now. Did that materialize out of I'm Tough?
It kind of did. Yeah. Cause I think like Emily and he and I were running together in the first miles of the race and chatting about the pandemic year and how crazy it had been. And he had just like offhandedly mentioned that since there weren't so many races going on, that he was getting into coaching and really, really enjoying it. So then like later on that year, towards like December, January, I remembered it and I was like, oh, I'm going to reach out to Jason, see if he's taken on any more athletes. And he was really stoked when I emailed him and pumped to do it. So yeah, that's been
awesome.
Yeah.
And just to remind our listening audience, Schlarb has 3 wins at the Run Rabbit 100 miler. So 3 victories to himself, and then coached Rich Lockwood to a victory also. That's a great story.
Yeah.
And maybe this is actually just occurring to me too. I mean, as somebody who was newer to the game at that point, that sort of engaging a coach sort of coincided with this kind of massive increase in performance that you've had over the last couple of years. Would you agree with that? Like, do you associate your working with a coach, with Jason Schlarb specifically, with sort of the big improvement in performance, in addition to obviously gaining more experience as well?
Yeah, I think it's both, but yeah, having someone with the kind of experience that Jason has definitely helped me out a lot. I remember like when we had our initial chat where he was just kind of like feeling out what type of athlete I was. And he was asking like what kind of mileage I was running or what kind of workouts I was doing. And he was like, wow, you really don't run that much. He was like, I think if you run a little bit more, you'll have a lot more success. Cause I think I was averaging like 35, 40 mile weeks, with a lot of like 15-mile weeks in between when I was like biking or climbing or something. Yeah. So, I think, he definitely knows. He was like, oh, there's some talent, but I think if there was a lot more running thrown in and then some really good, like specific workouts, that would help out a lot. And then I had a funky season last year, broke my elbow in February. Like I think I started working with Jason in January, and then at the end of February broke my elbow, and so was out for 3 months. But it was cool. It coincided with Jason tearing his ACL, so we were like injury buddies for that winter. And so I had a weird lead up into that season and was running more. And had some good races, won the Old Cascadia 50 mile, won the Y East Howell 100K.
That's where we met.
And that's where, and that's the first time I met you and Ryan. Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
And, but then I got a stress reaction. And so I don't know if it was just from a funky year or if it was from running a lot more. So I took the rest of the season off, just did a bunch of mountain biking. And coming into this season, I was a little bit concerned that maybe my body just couldn't run that type of mileage per week, but I haven't felt anything this year. And so I think maybe there was just a little bit of a calibration, to start working into doing.
I mean, it takes a little while to harden the body to these types of races. And it's good to be somebody like you who does have diverse interests and diverse skills in the mountains, so that you don't necessarily always have to default to your running shoes, but you can throw the skis on and you can jump on the bicycle as well. So let's talk about this season, because it's been definitely kind of a breakout for you. You started the season with us at the Gorge Waterfalls 100K, where
buddy.
Second. Yeah, we were so happy to have you. You finished a really strong second place behind David Laney. But you guys sort of had a really great sort of battle for, 50 miles of the 100K. And at that point, it was probably like your biggest result, I would say. So maybe kind of reflect on that race at Gorge and if it was similar to that I'm Tough experience where, sharing so many miles and so many hours with somebody like Dave Laney, who's got so many great results, so much experience under his belt. Like, how did that influence, how you saw yourself in the sport, or like, did you learn anything from that performance?
Yeah. Gorge was amazing. You guys put on such a fun race. And I had been hearing about that race since I first started when I ran Beacon Rock. So was so stoked when Ryan told me that you guys were going to be putting it on. So I had to be there. But
it was Ryan's idea that we bring the race back to.
Oh,
I don't think I've ever fully given him credit for this publicly. We'll tell the full story on the podcast someday, but just a quick shout out to Ryan Thrower. I was totally skeptical about the idea of actually being a race director. And now it's like a critical piece of our business and something that makes us extraordinarily happy. So shout out to Ryan Thrower. Anyway, tell us about your day, Gorge.
That's amazing, man. Yeah. Props to Ryan. I think it was like, I really wanted to run a more competitive race that year. I wanted to run like a couple more competitive races and see where I was at in the mix now that I had been running more mileage. And I hadn't even heard of like a progression run before until this past year working with Jason. So there was more fitness there that I wanted to see where I was at. I ended up running with Laney pretty much all day, and some leapfrogging. And then I don't know if it was just that course is like so runnable. And I hadn't had an effort that long where I was running the entire time with that kind of intensity. But I was just like basically towards 45 miles in, I felt like I was kind of hanging on for dear life, whereas like earlier on, I was like, okay, I feel good running with David. But then, it definitely showed that I still had a little bit more to learn. Once we got towards the later stages, started cramping up, and he was able to find another gear there. But running with him and noticing his amount of focus, because I normally try to chat with people in races, and he was a man of a couple words when I was out there with him. So seeing his like racing style and noticing like how focused he was, noticing when he power hiked and when he ran, was super beneficial. And then,
I remember you asking me about that, because I was running with you guys, following you with the gimbal on Instagram Live.
Yeah.
And you were out front and Laney was like hiking behind you. And after the race, you're like, so like when he was hiking there, like, do you think I should have been hiking? Just kind of trying to learn from the experience, which made me feel like, you definitely have what it takes to sort of, it takes a little while to learn how to run these races. And especially when you're competing against somebody who has so much more experience, there are those just tiny little, even 10 steps breaking into a hike can make a difference in terms of like whether you cramp up or not. Right. And so, he's a great person to learn from. And I think that experience for you, probably contributed to the success that you had the rest of the season, because you won 2 races since then. So, maybe let's move on and talk about those 2 races quickly. Obviously we'll spend more time on Run Rabbit, but in between Gorge and Run Rabbit, you did the Tushars 100K out in Utah race. I've heard is awesome. So maybe you could give us a quick little anecdote or two from that race. Tell us how that went. But specifically, the thing that I'm curious about is the altitude component for you, because of course you live in Seattle. And Tushars is high from what I've heard. Like, I think it goes up to like 11,000 feet. And also Run Rabbit is high, goes up to, I think, over 10. So if any comments you can make about being a lowlander, obviously you can train for the vertical from where you live in Seattle, but is there anything that you did that you think maybe helped you with the altitude at those 2 races?
Dude, I can't recommend Tushars enough. That race is seriously amazing. So beautiful. I think after I had made my my race schedule for the season kind of was like, oh dang, both of these races are at altitude. And I've never raced at altitude. So I didn't really know how it was going to go. And then we had late snow here in the Northwest in like March. We just got crushed or in like May, April, we just got crushed with snow. So
God, it was brutally wet spring.
Yeah. So any plans that I had to go run up at like Camp Muir or try to get high on Rainier was like not going to happen. So I had been down to Hard Rock to pace a friend. So I at least had an idea. I don't think I was only there for 2.5 days. So I don't think there was any real like acclimatization that happened while I was there, but I at least knew what it would feel like. So I was like, okay, I know that if I'm breathing hard, like that's just how it's going to feel at altitude. And Tushars, yeah, I think definitely spend a lot of time in the like 10,000. I think the Llano Peak, which is the high point of the race, might even get up to 12. But didn't feel terrible. And yeah, with my job and getting time off, it wasn't a thing for either race for me to go out early and spend time up high before racing. So I had talked to Jason about it and a couple other friends, and they were like, yeah, if you can't go out 4 or 5 days beforehand, then you should just ambush it and just wait until the very last moment to go up high. So that's exactly what I did, and just hope for the best at Tushars. And I definitely was breathing hard up at altitude, but didn't get any headaches or nausea or anything. And obviously had a good day out there, had fun, and just focused on.
But it's a massive Okay, well, I want you to maybe tell us a little bit more about that, but just to reinforce for the audience, like it's a massive disadvantage for somebody who lives in Seattle to show up and ambush Tushars and go up to 12,000 feet when you're racing against athletes who live in the Mountain West. I cut you off when you were saying you focused on drinking a ton, I think is what you said. So any things that you did, like just to help with it?
Is one... Like I've climbed Rainier here that goes up to like 14,000 feet. And I've climbed some higher peaks when I was in Central America. And the thing that I had always done was just anytime I was getting a headache, would just try to drink a ton of water. And so going into it, I kind of went with the same thing. I was like, I'm just going to drink as much as I can. And then I had heard from friends running at altitude that it's difficult to eat if you're not acclimatized, or maybe just in general. And so I was like, I'm just going to eat as much as I can, whenever I can. And I think that helped me out during the race.
Sweet. Well, I mean, I think it's, I don't know, maybe gives hope to those folks who have high altitude ambitions honestly, man, to see, also Arlen Glick, who finished second at Run Rabbit, lives in Ohio. Yeah. And so, he was operating likely without the benefit of acclimatization, nor the ability to kind of like train in the mountains. Of course, where you live in Seattle, you have amazing trail running and a lot of vertical. But to see both you guys put together such strong performances at Run Rabbit, not coming from that environment, I don't know, it gives hope, I think, to a lot of people out there who do want to do those competitive races at altitude. And obviously it is probably a disadvantage, but there are things that you can do, like, staying hydrated and feeling well up high to help hopefully mitigate that low blood oxygen saturation situation. So let's spend the rest of our time talking about Run Rabbit, because this is obviously the biggest race of your career, biggest result of your career. And I think there's going to be a lot of people who want to hear you talk about it. Before we get to the race itself, maybe just tell us a little bit about what you and Jason were working on throughout the summer, acknowledging that this was sort of the focus of the season.
Yeah. Definitely, I think is interesting to run a race like Tushars and then run a race like Run Rabbit, because although they're both at altitude, like Tushars was a ton of like power hiking. I had spent a lot of time with the poles during the first part of the summer, and then going into Run Rabbit, we shifted gears and I did a bunch more just like speed work, uphill tempo work and downhill tempo work. So I think that was, we changed a lot going from Tushars into Run Rabbit. So yeah, I think that was mainly the big change going into Run Rabbit was working on that.
Anything more specific? I mean, just for the audience who I'm sure would be curious to know a little bit more about the details of training when you say uphill tempos and downhill tempos. Can you give us an example?
Yeah. So, well, I do some workouts where I'll do maybe 5x or 6x hill repeats, maybe 2-minute hill repeats, and then go directly from that, maybe like a few minutes rest, and then go directly from that into like flat interval speed work or even a flat tempo. And then leading up towards the race, maybe in the last 3 to 4 weeks before going into a taper, did basically like a 25-minute uphill tempo up a climb immediately with no rest into a downhill tempo to however long it would take to get back down the climb. Yeah. Which I love. I had been like, oh man, cool. We haven't done these at all season. And I really loved them.
The up downs. Cool.
Yeah. Cause you get to the top and you're breathing hard. Your legs kind of feel like jelly, but it was good mentally as well to just be like, oh, you can still run fast downhill while recovering.
Yeah. Very cool. Very cool. So I would just want to read a quick excerpt from one of your Instagram captions and ask you to elaborate on it. It's sort of a post-race post that you put together, just kind of, I don't know, expressing, communicating your gratitude and the good feelings that you had after the race. What you said was, I've ran a good share of ultras, but this past weekend, things clicked on multiple levels for me mentally and physically. Even after a nasty fall early in the race, I never questioned my reason for being there, and the community surrounding this awesome event never let me doubt for a second. So I want to hear you talk about the never questioning part, because I think that's really important. But first, tell us about this fall that you took early in the race where you shattered your phone, because I really want to know what happened there.
It was pretty frustrating. I was pleasantly surprised that like the race was more mountainous than I thought it was going to be. I had always thought of Run Rabbit as a pretty runnable race, which it was, but there was like really cool sections of like boulders to climb over and stuff. But I think the most technical downhill is the Fish Creek Falls downhill, which comes at mile 13 or something. You do an out and back, and it's definitely the most technical, and down towards the bottom, you're climbing near these waterfalls on just like huge rock gardens and boulders. And it had started pouring down rain. It was just like a classic Colorado, not thunderstorm, but just like pouring down rain all of a sudden. And I had been running behind Avery for a while, and then had just like taken a high route up on some rocks, and he let me pass him. And I feel like I maybe had started running too fast down this really technical part, and came around a corner, and there was a family hiking, and I jogged over to the side to get around him and must have clipped a toe. I was running too fast, and it was one of those falls where I don't even know what happened, but I was just like tumbling really fast down the rocks and hit both knees, and then somehow ended up on my back and landed on my back really hard. Didn't realize my phone was shattered at that point, but I think my phone might have saved my lower back. Who knows? But I got up from that feeling pretty hurt, and kind of just like shuffled off to the side of the trail, because there was like a train of 15 dudes behind me, and let them all pass. It was kind of oh, man, mile 16.
You tomahawked in front of all the competition. Oh, no.
Yeah, exactly. It was a full on Superman to like somersault down the rocks. So yeah, I was pretty shooken up, and luckily there's an aid station like a mile later, and I'd cut my finger and had just like grit and gravel all over me, and they helped clean me up and bandage up my finger. But running out of that aid station, my knees felt pretty awful. And so kind of just said to myself, I was like, you know what? I've fallen before. I'll just give it 10 miles and it'll probably work itself out. And
so talk about this, because obviously the opposite could have happened, right? Like, I don't think it's necessarily natural for everybody to keep a good attitude in that situation when something terrible and unexpected happens early in a 100-mile race. And again, like I mentioned in this excerpt from your Instagram, you mentioned that you never questioned for a second. Can you put your finger on why that is?
I think just knowing all of the work from the season that went into it and how badly I wanted to be there and how stoked I was to run that race. I just never really even gave myself the option of bowing out. Obviously I was, going, like I said, I'll give myself 10 miles, but, and if things were feeling like acutely injured, or if I really felt like I was doing some damage, I probably would have pulled out. But I think, knowing the hard work that I put in. Also, I was supposed to run Rabbit in 2021, but with my stress reaction had to bow out of it. So I was really committed to finishing the race.
Awesome. So you also mentioned that things just kind of clicked for you. Can you identify what contributed to that? Was it a mixture between being happy to be there, fitness, psychology? What do you think it was that led to things clicking so well?
I think a really good mix of all of that. I think being way more fit than I had ever been before to run 100, really, aside from my injury from falling, I felt just really great. And then so with that, I was just so happy to be out there. And so, things felt way less of a grind, and more of just, really fluid. So.
Sweet.
Yeah.
So give us some more details about the competition, because at some point you and Avery kind of separated from the rest of the pack. I think ran together through maybe halfway. And then eventually the critical separation happened. And maybe you could bring us into that moment too, because I think for somebody like you, it's a fairly profound moment in your entire career, not necessarily just in this race, right? Because you're breaking away from the pack at a competitive 100-mile race. You're somebody who's definitely on the upswing in your career. And there's kind of two ways you could go, kind of rise to that occasion and deliver a victory as you did, or, maybe panic and choke it away. So maybe tell us about the moment where you pulled away from Avery, what was going through your head, and how were you able to sort of meet that moment with composure?
Yeah, it was definitely a really, really intensely emotional moment. It was interesting because I didn't really actually end up spending that much time running. I had run with Avery up until I fell, and then he pulled away probably 5-8 minutes from the pack. And I had run with Arlen up through the high country and then through, and I hadn't seen Avery at all since mile 16 at this point. So I ran with Arlen for maybe 4 or 5 miles up through 50K. And then Arlen took a break. There's this 15-mile long downhill. It's insane. It's on mountain bike trails. It's on mountain bike trails. Yeah. But they just switch back and you're just, it was just crazy. You're going downhill for so long and then into town, and Avery was still ahead. This was at mile 50. And going up, and you do another little figure 8 on the other side of town. And he was still way ahead of me. My knee had started hurting a lot more on that uphill. I was I think it had started swelling at that point. So it was getting a little bit more difficult to bend on downhills. So I was still focused and in it, but thinking a little bit oh, he's probably putting some time on me. But I had also a friend of mine, Emily Hoggood, had said before the race, I was chatting with her and she was just remember in 100 miles, as bad as you're feeling at points, like people are feeling just as bad or maybe worse.
It's always so hard to remember, isn't it?
I know it is. Yeah. Cause you're just like, oh, I'm dogging it right now. Like they're probably running away. And I had kind of been thinking that a little bit coming down that hill. There's like a 6-mile downhill back into the aid station, which would be like mile 63 when you come back into that aid station. And so Avery was still, I figured, 8-10 minutes ahead of me. And then you come off the mountain bike trail and you run like a 1/4 mile on this gravel road into the aid station. And my headlamp caught like his shirt. And I was like, Avery's right there. Like, holy moly. I had thought he was putting time on me. And then he was right there. And that was like a moment in my mind where I was like, let's go. I was like immediately started feeling a lot better. And I think he stopped to do a little bit longer of a transition with his crew. And my buddy Rob was there crewing me, and I just grabbed a vest from him and then was like, let's just go. In my head on the way down, I had been like, my knee was hurting a little bit on the downhills. And I was like, I'm just going to run this entire uphill. Hopefully my knee feels better on the uphill. And it ended up feeling a lot better, and running out of that aid fast. And then just all the way back up into the high country, just tried to run almost every step. And I guess ended up putting some time on the pack in that moment.
That is so cool, man. And it's something that I stress all the time when I'm doing commentary for live streams, is how critical those aid stations can be at the front of the race, and how often it is that that's where the separation happens. Like if two guys or, two women come in at the same time, sometimes the one who's feeling better can get out more quickly. And that's like the adrenaline and the juice that they need to actually break the elastic, leaving that aid station. It sounds like that's what happened for you guys.
Yeah, it must have been, because I got super pumped up in that moment, and it was like through like 63 miles, and it was like going into like the true night of the race. So yeah, I think it was a catalyst and like a tough moment to really like try to accelerate things.
So ultimately you had more than an hour gap when you reached the finish line. So give us any other highlights or lowlights from emerging into the night alone in the lead of Run Rabbit, and more specifically arriving at the finish line, winning, what was absolutely, your biggest, best performance of your career, and something that really puts your name on the map in a much more significant way in the national, international ultra running world.
Yeah, it's interesting the way they do Run Rabbit, because I pulled ahead, and then you have like a really long climb back into the high country. But the tortoise race for Run Rabbit starts 4 hours ahead of the hares race. So the whole time you're still like catching people and like chatting with people about their race. And also like on the climbs, you're looking back below you and you're like, oh, there's like 4 headlamps below me. Who knows who they are? So that was really interesting. But it's the same way at Tushars. They run like a 70K. And so I kind of like that you're able to still like, you're not just running all by yourself for the rest of the race.
Meaning you can never just take your foot off the gas, and you always have to be wary of whose headlamps are behind you, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Whose headlamps are behind me. But then also, having that carrot to be like, oh, there's someone ahead of me. Like I'm going to run, I'll catch them throughout like a lot of the high country. But then, a lot of time on my own.
You're exchanging good jobs the whole way, giving each other kudos. Oh, that's beautiful, man. Hell yeah. It's a good way to stay inspired.
Mm-hmm. And then, they also don't allow pacers at Run Rabbit. So that was also like a nice thing to have some more people out there, because you got no one with you for the rest of the night. And ran the Continental Divide section up there in the high country. Once you get to mile 75 or something like that, is really, really cool. And there wasn't a thunderstorm going on, but every once in a while, like lightning would just strike in the distance, which was really, really beautiful too. Just like you're running in darkness and then just every once in a while you just see a flash. But then, ultimately going up into the last aid station at the top of Mount Warner, maybe like 6 miles before that, it just socked back in with fog where you couldn't see more than like 15 feet in front of you. Started raining again. I was like, oh man, like I thought we were through the crux of the weather because there had been hail earlier on in the day. So that made things difficult. I still had no idea where anyone was behind me.
Really? You weren't? I was going to ask you that.
Yeah, I kind of just like made it like I try not to ask people. I don't think anyone knew either. I don't think they were updating up where like
it's a pretty remote area. You don't see your crew at all either. So
yep.
Any information you get would probably be unreliable anyway. So it's better not to ask.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was just running and got up to the top of Mount Warner. The fog was so thick and they were like, do you need anything? And I was like, I think I'm good on water. Like, I just don't want to get caught. I'm ready to just bomb this downhill. And they were like, okay, just go down the road. And I was literally like, where is the road? The fog was so dense. And the aid station worker had to basically like hold my hand and like walk me over and be like, this is where the road is. So at that point I took my headlamp off my head and held it down low. And that helped out a ton. Cause when you have it on your head, it like reflects the light and you just like, you can't see anything. So I held it down low and that helped. But then it's just a bomber, like 6 mile downhill
service road.
Yeah. Like not too steep where it like hurts to run fast and like not very rocky. So it was I had gone into it thinking it would
just enjoy the trip down the mountain.
Yeah. Yep. Was pumped and feeling like I could run sub 18 hours. So I was kind of like pushing myself a little bit on the downhill. Unfortunately, like a mile from the finish, I got lost, which was a nightmare scenario. Went through like a construction site and got lost for like a minute, but then found my way. But then, you run back down to the bottom of the ski hill. And I had heard things from people, kind of forgotten about it, but they start a 50-mile race that morning at 6 a.m. And so I turned the corner to head into the finishing chute. And there was just a sea of headlamps running at me. And I was like, holy moly. It was like the 50-mile start was like coming at me. And I was running against the grain. Once I was like not startled anymore and everyone saw what my bib was, it was like a pretty special moment. Everyone was like, everyone was cheering as they were like running past their 50-mile race. Cool. It was amazing. And then, passed into the finishing chute and, hugged my crew and hugged the race director. I think his name is Paul. And, it all kind of started flooding in of just like, the whole thing. Still, it felt very surreal for a long time. And then I was like, oh, how far back are Arlen and Avery or whoever is in the, in second? And they were like, I think you got like 40-minute gap. And that just blew me away. I would have had no idea. I figured people were hot on my heels. It was crazy.
With a little bit of perspective, are there any profound lessons from this awesome performance that you hope to take forward with you? Because this is a huge thing to kind of hang your hat on and is another great piece of experience in your, now Rolodex of ultra running finishes and something that you can build upon. It can be the foundation of the future of Rich Lockwood's career. So any other sort of like big takeaways or lessons from Run Rabbit?
I try to think about that kind of thing right after the race, like while it's fresh. And I think just, I did the best job I ever had of just maintaining positivity the whole way through. And that really helped with like not, slogging out any miles, just walking up any hills or anything. I was like like just maintains super motivation through the whole thing. So I'll definitely take that with me, to just like try to just stay in that moment and not think about, for any other race, like who's ahead of me or who's behind me, like just stay in my moment and be like, just keep pushing. Even if it's hurting, like keep pushing. I did a lot of, like on some uphills would do intervals of like 30 seconds on running and then like 30 seconds, like just power hiking fast through some of those. So I like that. I think I'll take that with me as well.
That's interesting. I've never heard anybody like actually regiment it like that in a race situation.
I don't know. I don't know why I just started doing it like that. But it gives me something to focus on, and it keeps me motivated to get back into a run again.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. Run Rabbit didn't have any huge, like really long, prolonged uphills, but it had some. I think so.
You were able to maintain the positivity even while you were ragdolling down Fish Creek Falls at mile 13 and 100-mile race. It's awesome, man. Congratulations. So very serious question for you now. How much of the victory do you attribute to wearing Freetrail arm sleeves?
I had never worn arm sleeves before in my life. And I think I'm an arm sleeves guy now, dude.
Dude, welcome to the club. Welcome to the club. Yeah, I take full credit for your victory there. So
as you should.
Don't worry about it. Yeah.
Ryan Thrower was clutch. I talked to Jason a week before the race, and he was like, dude, arm sleeves for the race will be great. And so I was like, I've never worn them. I don't own them. And reached out to Ryan, and he was like, oh yeah, I've got something.
He was like, Rich Lockwood needs arm sleeves. We got to get him some. I was like, no brainer. Very cool, man. Yeah, very, very cool. And just an awesome, I mean, as I've said publicly a number of times, like, I don't know, like people think very highly of you in Seattle, but you sort of fly under the radar, and this is just a massive breakthrough for you, I think. And I think the sky's the limit. And I want to ask you about what's next, sort of to close, but maybe before we get to that, one final question. Man, you've made some money this year racing. It occurred to me while I was thinking about what we should talk about, that like, you made just $2,000 at Gorge Waterfalls, but I think you made $15,000 at Run Rabbit. And so you probably have made more prize money than any trail runner in the world this year in 2 performances. I don't know. I mean, not to put you on the spot or anything like that, but like, I don't know. It's I think a good new, I guess, evolution of the sport. I mean, Run Rabbit has always been committed towards, professionalizing the sport and compensating the winners and podium finishers and beyond, the masters athletes and people like that. Is there anything you want to say about just like, I don't know, what it means to you to actually earn some money off these performances? Obviously, it's not why you do it, but I figured it might be an interesting thing to talk about.
Yeah, I think, like you said, it's not why you do it. I didn't sign up for Gorge or for Run Rabbit being like, I'm after the money. It just so, it's like races that are competitive sometimes end up having prize money. So it's definitely like a nice bonus. But I think, my goal was to run competitive races, and then also wanted to get a Hard Rock and Western qualifier, and Run Rabbit fit that as well. But I think, especially for Run Rabbit, it's a really interesting, like, I think people do go out running strong, and there's everyone, like a lot of people in the front, like I had never run in a front pack of like 25 dudes all running like within a minute of each other. So I think, not going after the prize money, but it makes a race a lot more interesting. And then, I think winning a race against some people that I don't think I hadn't put myself up there, being able to beat them, the prize money just elevates that in my mind of being like, oh, okay, maybe I am onto something. Maybe I want to pursue this more. Yeah.
Yeah. And as a unsponsored athlete too, it makes a big difference. You're racing against guys who are actually paid to be runners. So, it's, I think, a great sort of capstone to your season, or, I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for? A fair compensation or a fair representation of, the value that you bring to the sport as an athlete is, kind of what you earned here in these couple of races. So congratulations to you on that. So maybe let's close by just talking about what's next for you. Again, this was a breakthrough for you. I'm sure it in some way kind of changes the way you think about the future, think about your place within the greater ultra running ecosystem, the goals that you might be setting for yourself. It was a Hard Rock and a Western States qualifier, so I'm assuming you're putting your name in those two lotteries. What else has you inspired as an athlete, say, over the next 3 years?
Yeah, so I think I'd like to invest a little bit of the prize money from the race into trying to get out and race internationally. That's what's really exciting me right now. My wife and I had an awesome honeymoon trip this summer out to in like early July. We went out to the Alps, went to Chamonix, and then also spent some time in the Dolomites. And it definitely blew my mind and got me really excited to try to get out and race internationally. So I've thrown my name in for Trans Gran Canaria, which I've talked to Pacific Northwest crusher Caitlin Gerben about, and she highly recommended it. So that's on my list for this coming year. And then, yeah, I've got some other things in the works, but with my work, I'm still trying to figure out time off, because going to race at the Gorge versus going to race, internationally is a lot different of a time commitment. So I'm going to have to balance some things out, but definitely really stoked to try to get out and see, stack myself up nationally here, and then to see how I stack up internationally too is really exciting.
Oh, yeah. Dude, I love it. And yeah, I think it is the natural progression for an athlete like you to now go over to Europe and do one of those big races, learn a little bit more, gain that experience, sort of as an analog to what we talked about earlier from I'm Tough, when you raced against Jason and Dakota and then Laney. Now you go over to Europe and race against some of those great champions. It's only going to help you grow as an athlete. And I also love what you said about investing what you made in these races in your own career. Like, what a great way to wind down a great conversation. I think that's just a beautiful point, investing in yourself, investing in your own career, and having trust that investment will pay dividends, whether in the form of hopefully, a great sponsorship, but more importantly, in great experiences and other great performances and great memories that you gain in this amazing sport. So Rich Lockwood, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, buddy. It's great to chat with you.
Thank you again so much for having me, man. It's been awesome.